Growing up in a small town, I always found comfort in the simple life. The kind where everyone knows your name, and nothing stays secret for long. I thought that was a good thing until recently, because sometimes, the last person to know what's going on is the one who matters most. I met Lucy almost 10 years ago. I was a fresh college graduate who came back home to start my teaching career, and she was the new girl in town. She had that kind of beauty that you couldn't ignore, long, flowing hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through you. She wasn't like the girls I grew up with. She was glamorous, full of life, and she made every room she walked into feel smaller. I was instantly drawn to her like most guys were. She'd grown up in the big city, but decided to give small-town life a shot for some reason she never really explained. Maybe she wanted a change, or maybe she was just curious. I was curious too about her. From the start, she kept me at arm's length. We were friends, or at least that's what she called it. I reached out to her a few times, asked her out, dropped by the cafe where she worked for a while, invited her to local events. She always had an excuse ready. "You're sweet, Sam," she'd say, "but I'm not really looking for anything serious right now." And I'd watch as she went off with her friends from the city. Ruby, Ember, and that one guy. Lucy was always the life of the party, soaking up attention like a sponge, but I still believed she had a softer side. One she didn't show to everyone. There were moments, fleeting ones, where she seemed almost vulnerable, like she was tired of the expectations that came with being her. Those glimpses kept me hoping. Eventually, we ended up seeing each other more often. Not on dates, but in casual settings with mutual friends. My friends Bruce and Roy would sometimes join us, and Claire, too. Claire's always been a good friend to me, though I knew she had a thing for me. It wasn't something I could reciprocate. My eyes were on Lucy, even when I tried to look away. Lucy and I grew closer over time, but it wasn't anything more than friendship for a long while. I'd hear about her weekend trips to the city, the nights she'd go clubbing with Ruby and Ember, the fancy dinners and high-life atmosphere she still missed. It wasn't my world, but I wanted her to be a part of mine. I figured that one day, she'd see there was more to life than the spotlight. Then something shifted between us, almost like a switch had flipped. But that comes later. For now, all I can say is that when Lucy finally agreed to a real date, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. We dated for 2 years before getting married. 6 years into the marriage, and I thought we were happy. We had our disagreements. She craved excitement and adventure, and I was content with routine, but I thought we balanced each other out. I loved her. Still do, I suppose, despite everything. Maybe that's why it's been so hard to accept the truth. The first real shock came a few months ago when Lucy began to seem distant. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first, just little things. She'd stay out later than usual with her city friends, or disappear into her phone when we were supposed to be spending time together. I knew something was off when her laughter began to sound different. Forced, like she was playing a part. But the real blow came one night when I found an old message on her phone, one that she hadn't deleted. It was from years ago, back when we'd first started dating. It wasn't just any message. It was from a guy named Greg, someone I'd never heard of. The conversation didn't seem innocent. Far from it. The dates on the messages lined up with a time when I thought Lucy and I were exclusive. It was the first hint that she'd been unfaithful in the past, that maybe our perfect beginning wasn't so perfect after all. I confronted her, of course. She denied everything at first, said Greg was just a friend, that I was overreacting. But when I pressed, she broke down. Told me it had been a mistake, that it only happened for a month, and she ended it because she realized she loved me. Stung like hell, but she seemed sincere, remorseful even. I didn't know what to do. I thought we'd moved past it, until recently when I saw her with Juan. And that's when I knew the past wasn't just a ghost. It was very much alive. Finding out about Greg had been hard enough, but I managed to put it behind us. At least that's what I told myself. After Lucy confessed, I was shattered. But I couldn't just throw away everything we'd built together. I loved her even if it hurt. So I forgave her, or at least I tried. I told myself that everyone makes mistakes, that what mattered was how we moved forward. For a while, things seemed to get better. She made an effort, and I did too. We started going on dates again, tried new activities, even considered taking a trip together. But looking back, I wonder if it was just a band-aid over a wound that never really healed. The thing about living in a small town is that rumors spread like wildfire. As much as I tried to bury what happened with Greg, whispers still reached my ears. Friends and acquaintances would drop subtle comments or ask questions that cut a little too close to the bone. Bruce once mentioned that he'd seen Lucy talking to some guy at a party before we got married. He didn't know it was Greg, but I did, and it was like pouring salt on an open wound. Even after Lucy and I seemed to get back on track, something still lingered between us. There were moments where I'd catch her staring off into the distance, as if she were somewhere else entirely. She'd brush it off when I asked, blaming it on work stress or missing her friends in the city. But I could sense there was more to it. It all came crashing down during a get-together at Bruce's house. He'd thrown a barbecue for our little group of friends, and as always, Lucy was the center of attention. She had a way of charming everyone around her. Laughing at Bruce's terrible jokes, poking fun at Roy's quiet demeanor, even getting Claire to crack a rare smile. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that things were finally back to normal. Then Juan showed up. I hadn't seen him in a while. He lived in the city and didn't come around often. He was an old friend of Lucy's, someone she'd known since childhood. I'd never had a problem with him, though his confidence and charm sometimes felt a bit much. He had that big city slickness that made me uneasy, like he was always putting on a show. Lucy's face lit up when she saw him, and I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. They spent a lot of time catching up that evening. At first, it seemed innocent enough. They'd always been close, and it wasn't unusual for Lucy to be friendly with her old friends. But as the night wore on, I noticed little things that didn't sit right with me. The way her laughter seemed a little too bright, how she leaned in just a bit too close when they spoke, and the way Juan's gaze lingered on her in a way that made my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off. After all, Lucy was my wife and I had to trust her. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, reliving old insecurities from what happened with Greg. But then, while Lucy was talking with Ember and Ruby, I caught a conversation between Juan and Bruce that nearly knocked the wind out of me. Bruce, clearly tipsy, slapped Juan on the back and said, "You two are always like fire and gasoline. Can't believe nothing's ever happened there." Juan chuckled and replied, "Well, who says nothing ever did?" It was a flippant remark, delivered in a half-joking tone, but the implication was clear enough to make my blood run cold. I didn't confront Lucy right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear the truth, but I couldn't let it go either. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before, like the way she'd become more protective of her phone, how she seemed distracted even when we were alone together. The nights she spent in the city with her friends started feeling like more than just harmless getaways. One evening, while Lucy was in the shower, I picked up her phone. I hadn't planned to. I wasn't the kind of guy who snooped through his wife's private stuff. But there it was, just sitting on the counter. I don't know what I was looking for, or even if I'd find anything at all. But what I found confirmed my worst fears. There was a string of messages between her and Juan, starting months ago. At first, it was nothing out of the ordinary. Casual conversations about mutual friends, reminiscing about old times. But then the tone shifted. The messages became more personal, more intimate. Words that should have been reserved for me were now being exchanged with him. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the thread, my heart pounding faster with each line. The culmination of my suspicions came in one of the last messages, where she wrote, "I miss the way things used to be." And his reply, "I miss you too." That was when I knew. It wasn't just my imagination, wasn't just my own paranoia. Lucy was having an affair with Juan of all people. And the worst part was, this wasn't some distant past I could chalk up to a mistake. It was happening now, right under my nose. Finding out about Lucy's affair with Juan felt like being plunged into icy water. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. I just stood there, staring at her phone as if the words would change if I looked hard enough. But they didn't. The betrayal was real, and it was unfolding right in front of me. It wasn't like with Greg, something buried in the past that we could move beyond. This was happening now, and I couldn't ignore it. I didn't confront her that night. She came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, looking at me with those same blue eyes that once captivated me. It felt like there was a wall between us, a wall built from secrets and lies. I tried to act normal, pretended I was scrolling through my own phone. She didn't seem to notice my unease, or maybe she was just good at hiding things. I was starting to realize that I didn't know her as well as I thought. For the next few days, I struggled with what to do. I couldn't just come out and accuse her without proof. Solid proof. The messages were damning, yes, but they didn't say everything. I needed more than words on a screen. I needed to know the whole truth. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. Lucy had planned a weekend trip to the city with Ruby and Ember, just like she'd done countless times before. I told her I'd be busy catching up on grading papers and didn't mind her getting away for a couple of days. I even kissed her goodbye, playing the part of the supportive husband while my insides twisted into knots. The moment she left, I knew what I had to do. I reached out to Claire first. She was my rock during all of this, the one person who would listen without judgment. I told her what I'd found, and though I could see the hurt in her eyes, probably because of her own unspoken feelings for me, she didn't let it get in the way. "You need to find out if there's more to this," she said. "You can't go off half-cocked." She was right. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove to the city. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and if Lucy found out, there'd be no way to explain myself. But I had to know if she was really with Ruby and Ember or if she was with him. The city felt like a different world, one where Lucy fit in perfectly and I was just an outsider. The bright lights, the crowded streets, the endless noise. It was a place she never truly left behind, even when she married me. I parked my car a few blocks away from the apartment where Ruby and Ember lived, and waited. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I started to think maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe she really was just visiting her friends. But then I saw her. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her, laughing like there was no weight on her shoulders, was Juan. They didn't see me. I was just another face in the crowded city streets. But I saw them. They went into a restaurant together, the kind of upscale place we never went to, and I followed them in from a distance. I sat at the bar, far enough away that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough to see how comfortable they were together. The way her hand brushed against his arm, the way he leaned in when he spoke to her. It was clear that this was more than just an innocent reunion. After dinner, they left the restaurant hand in hand. It was like a punch to the gut. All the doubts I tried to suppress came flooding back, overwhelming me. I could have followed them further, but I didn't need to. I had my answer. Driving back to the small town felt like returning to another life. I was furious, betrayed, but beneath the anger, there was a deep sadness that I couldn't shake. I thought back to when Lucy and I first started dating, and how different things were then. She had finally said yes after months of me asking her out. I still remember the day clearly. It was during one of those town fairs, the kind that only small towns know how to pull off. There was music, laughter, the smell of fried dough in the air. I'd given up on asking her out at that point. She turned me down so many times that I started to accept that we'd just be friends. But then she came up to me, out of the blue, and said, "So, are you still up for that date?" I almost thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She was serious. Our first date wasn't anything special. We went to a diner on the edge of town and spent hours just talking. She told me about her life in the city, how she sometimes felt like she didn't belong there, how she craved something different. It felt like we connected in a way that I never thought was possible. After that, everything seemed to fall into place. But now I was starting to wonder if she ever really left the city behind, or if she just found a way to bring it with her. It was after that weekend trip when I finally confronted Lucy. I told her I knew about Juan, that I saw them together. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she looked at me with that same expression she had the day she told me about Greg. Remorseful, but not enough. It was like she didn't truly understand what she'd done to us. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Sam," she said. It just did." Those words shattered me. "It just did." I repeated. "That's your excuse?" "It just did." Those 3 words echoed in my head as I stared at Lucy. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand why she would betray me like this. Again. But all I could do was shake my head in disbelief. Her calmness was maddening. She looked like she was sorry, but it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced that expression in the mirror 100 times before. "I don't understand, Lucy," I said, my voice low and trembling. "How could you do this to me, to us?" She took a step closer, but I moved back. I couldn't bear to have her touch me. "Sam, please, just listen," she pleaded. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't plan it. We just started talking. And then, it got out of hand." I laughed bitterly. "Out of hand? You were holding hands with him, Lucy. You were acting like everything was perfectly fine while you were sneaking around with him." The words came out harsh and raw, the pain I was trying to contain bleeding into every syllable. Lucy's face crumpled as she sank down onto the couch. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sam. It wasn't like... It's not like before." Her voice cracked on the last word, but I was done feeling sympathy. The image of her and Juan laughing together, their hands intertwined, flashed in my mind. "What do you mean it's not like before?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Did you actually love him?" She shook her head frantically. "No, it wasn't love. It was... I don't know. It was stupid. I was feeling lost." Her excuses fell flat. I'd heard them before, all those years ago when I found out about her affair with Greg. I thought we'd moved past it, that we'd grown stronger. But it was clear now, whatever we had built together, it was crumbling, and I didn't know if it could be repaired this time. The affair with Greg had been different. At least that's what I told myself back then. We weren't married yet, and it was one of those turbulent months where we were constantly on and off. I'd caught her in a lie, and she confessed that she'd been seeing him for about a month. She begged me for another chance, said she'd been scared of settling down, that she wasn't sure if I was the one. In the end, I took her back. I thought I was doing the right thing, proving my commitment. I thought we were stronger than one mistake. But now I realized it wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. She was the kind of person who thrived on excitement, on the thrill of something new, something forbidden. And once again, I was left cleaning up the mess while she had her fun. She was still talking, her words blurring together, something about feeling empty and confused. I cut her off. "Why him, Lucy? Why Juan?" My voice was strained with the weight of my anger. "Wasn't it enough that you already had an affair once? Why did you do it again?" Her face hardened, the remorse slipping away as something colder took its place. "I'm not perfect, Sam. I make mistakes. But you're not exactly faultless either." The sudden shift in her tone caught me off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, crossing my arms. "It means that you've changed too," she snapped. "Ever since we got married, it's like you're content with things staying the same. You never want to do anything spontaneous anymore. You don't listen when I tell you I'm unhappy." I felt my blood boil at her accusation. "I'm sorry if working hard to provide for our life is such a disappointment for you," I retorted, sarcasm dripping from my words. "I didn't realize you were looking for a thrill instead of a husband." The argument exploded from there. We exchanged blame, throwing years of pent-up frustrations at each other. She accused me of being too boring, too predictable. I accused her of never being satisfied, of always looking for something or someone better. The words were sharp, cutting through the remnants of whatever love we had left. But there was one thing she said that stuck with me long after the argument ended. "You never forgave me for what happened with Greg. You've been holding on to that resentment all this time." Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't truly forgiven her, even though I told myself I had. But then again, how could I forgive her if she kept repeating the same mistakes? It was like trying to heal a wound that never fully closed, only for it to be ripped open again. The days that followed were a blur of silence and avoidance. I couldn't bear to look at her, and she seemed to be walking on eggshells, afraid to provoke another argument. The tension was suffocating, and I found myself staying out later than usual, hanging out with Bruce and Roy just to avoid going home. One night, as we sat in a dimly lit bar, Claire joined us. She could tell something was wrong the moment she saw me. "What's going on, Sam?" she asked softly, her eyes full of concern. I took a long sip of my drink, avoiding her gaze. "Lucy and I, we're having problems." It was an understatement, but I couldn't bring myself to say more. I didn't want anyone to know the extent of her betrayal. Not yet. Claire put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I'm here for you, Sam. Whatever you need." For a moment, I wondered if she knew the whole truth. There had always been an unspoken connection between us, something I never explored because of my commitment to Lucy. But now, with my marriage falling apart, I found myself drawn to Claire's steady presence, her unwavering loyalty. It was dangerous, and I knew it, but I couldn't help the way I felt. As the night wore on, I found myself opening up to her more than I intended, telling her about Lucy's affair. I saw the flash of anger in her eyes when I mentioned Juan's name, but she didn't say anything bad about Lucy. Instead, she just listened, her quiet support meaning more to me than she probably realized. When I finally returned home that night, I knew I had a decision to make. I could keep holding on to the remnants of my broken marriage, or I could finally let go and confront the darkness that was growing inside me. The days dragged on, each one more painful than the last. Lucy and I moved around each other like ghosts in our own home. Our conversations reduced to strained pleasantries and awkward silences. I avoided eye contact, afraid that if I looked too closely, I'd see something that would make me break. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the school and grading papers I would have normally let pile up. Anything to avoid being home. Claire had become my confidant, the one person who seemed to understand the depths of my pain. We met up a few times after work, and it wasn't long before I found myself looking forward to our talks. Her kindness, the way she listened without judgment. It was a stark contrast to the bitterness that had seeped into every corner of my marriage. But even though I was leaning on her, I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore what was happening with Lucy forever. Eventually, the tension at home reached a boiling point. One evening, I found Lucy sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched glass of wine. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. "We can't keep going like this, Sam," she said quietly. "We need to talk." I sighed, my whole body heavy with exhaustion. "What's left to say, Lucy? You cheated on me again. What do you expect me to do? Just forget about it?" "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I don't expect you to forget, but I want to explain. I owe you that much." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Fine. Then explain." She hesitated, as if gathering her thoughts. "It wasn't just about Juan," she began, her voice wavering. "It was about feeling trapped. This town, this life. It's not what I imagined for myself. I thought I could adapt, but it's hard." "So you slept with him because you're bored?" I shot back, my words laced with venom. She shook her head, her expression pained. "It wasn't like that. I know it sounds like an excuse, but I felt so disconnected. You were always working, and we barely spent time together. I just wanted to feel alive." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the girl I fell in love with. The girl who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and make me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. But that girl was long gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Lucy, I've given you everything," I said, my voice low and tense. "I gave up so much to be with you, to build a life together here. But it was never enough, was it?" She looked down at the table, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never asked you to change for me, Sam," she whispered. "You did that on your own." I stared at her, stunned by the coldness of her words. For a long time, I didn't know what to say. "You know," I finally said, "I think the worst part of all this is that I'm not even surprised anymore." I turned to leave, but she called out after me. "Wait, Sam. There's more." I stopped in my tracks, dreading what she was about to say. "More?" I echoed, my stomach tightening. What else could there possibly be? She took a deep breath. "Juan, he wasn't the only one." The air seemed to leave the room. I felt my chest constrict, a heavy weight pressing down on me. "You mean, there were others?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible. It wasn't like I had some kind of affair with every guy I met, she said quickly, as if that somehow made things better. There were just a few times when things were really bad between us. My mind raced, replaying every moment over the past few years, trying to piece together what was real and what was a lie. How long? I asked, my voice coming out hoarse. How long has this been going on? She didn't answer right away. The first time was about a year after we got married. It was just once, and I swore it would never happen again. She looked at me with pleading eyes, but I was too numb to feel anything. But then, there were a few more times here and there. I felt sick. The woman I'd shared my life with, who I thought I knew better than anyone else, had been living a double life. Why didn't you just leave me? I asked, my voice breaking. If you were so unhappy, why didn't you just walk away? She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I don't know, she whispered. I didn't want to lose you, Sam. I didn't want to lose us. I laughed bitterly, my heart twisting in my chest. Well, congratulations, Lucy. You managed to lose us anyway. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I barely slept, my mind replaying every painful confession, every lie she'd told. I thought about the promises we made to each other, the future we were supposed to share, and all I could see was how foolish I'd been to believe any of it. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit back and let her get away with what she'd done. It was time to show Lucy that there were consequences for her actions. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. If she thought she could humiliate me and walk away unscathed, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I started by reaching out to Bruce and Roy, letting them in on what was happening. I knew I'd need their help with the plan that was already taking shape in my mind. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to get them on board. They were my closest friends, and I trusted them more than anyone else. If there was anyone who'd stand by me through this, it was them. As I laid out the details, I could see the disbelief on their faces turning into something else, something dark and resolute. I wasn't the only one who was angry. They had stood by and watched as I tried to hold my marriage together, as I forgave Lucy time and time again. And now, they were just as ready as I was to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I spent the next few days putting my plan in motion, careful to keep everything under wraps. I didn't want Lucy catching even a hint of what I had in store for her. The first step was to make sure I had her friends involved, and that meant getting close to Ruby, Ember, and Juan. Fortunately, it wasn't hard to figure out when they would be visiting town. Lucy hadn't exactly been discreet about her plans. Bruce, Roy, and I set up a meet-and-greet scenario that would let us keep an eye on Lucy's friends when they came into town. It wasn't long before the trio arrived, just in time for one of Lucy's so-called girls' nights. Except this time, Juan had decided to join in on the fun. I made sure to be at the local bar where they gathered, with Bruce and Roy stationed in strategic spots around the place. It wasn't the kind of bar Lucy and her friends typically visited. They usually opted for trendier spots in the city, but I had a hunch that bringing them to our local haunt would lower their guard. This was my turf, and I knew the crowd. From my vantage point, I could see Lucy laughing and joking with her friends, her arm occasionally brushing against Juan's as they sat close together. It was subtle, almost casual. But after what she had confessed, I knew better. The air between them crackled with the unspoken history that still lingered. I clenched my jaw, willing myself to stay composed. The real show was about to begin. As planned, Claire showed up not long after. I had asked her to be part of this, though I kept the details vague. She was suspicious at first, but I convinced her that all I wanted was for her to be there as moral support. I didn't mention that I intended for Lucy to see us together. The way she'd look at us, the jealousy that would surely flash across her face. It would be my first small victory. It didn't take long for Lucy to notice Claire and me talking at the bar. Her smile faltered as her gaze flicked between us. I leaned closer to Claire, pretending to whisper something funny into her ear. Claire played along, laughing and resting her hand on my shoulder. It was enough to catch Lucy's attention, but not enough to spark a scene. Yet, when Juan excused himself to the bathroom, I seized my chance. I walked over to Lucy's table, and without a hint of hesitation, I greeted Ruby and Ember. "Hey ladies, long time no see," I said, giving them my best friendly smile. Lucy stared at me, her expression guarded. "Sam, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. I shrugged. "Just hanging out with friends," I said, nodding toward Claire. She thought we should grab a drink and catch up. Ruby raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I didn't realize you and Claire were close." I caught the undertone in her voice, the implication that Claire had always been a little too friendly for her own good. "We've always been close," I said nonchalantly, letting the words hang in the air. The tension at the table was palpable, and I could see Lucy struggling to keep her composure. Just as I was about to walk away, Juan returned, his smile fading when he saw me. "Sam," he said, his tone cautious. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, small world, huh?" I replied, my voice deceptively casual. "I was just saying hi to the girls." Juan exchanged a glance with Lucy, and something unsaid passed between them. I knew then that I'd struck a nerve. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my plan required coordination, and that's where Bruce and Roy came in. While I had been keeping Lucy and her friends distracted, Bruce had slipped out and set up something special in the parking lot. Something that would make sure the night ended with a bang. After I left the table, I made my way outside with Claire. The night was chilly, and the air was thick with anticipation. I saw Bruce in the distance, giving me a subtle nod to let me know everything was ready. Moments later, a commotion broke out near the entrance. A loud argument echoed through the parking lot, and I could hear Lucy's voice among the chaos. It wasn't until I got closer that I realized what Bruce had done. He had found an old friend of Juan's, someone who knew about his history of messing around with married women. And now he was confronting Juan in front of everyone, accusing him of making a move on yet another married woman. This time, Lucy. The scene escalated quickly. Ruby and Ember tried to defuse the situation, but it was too late. The bar patrons had gathered, forming a crowd around the spectacle. Lucy was visibly distressed, caught between defending Juan and distancing herself from the accusations. I watched from the sidelines, a dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. Bruce's friend didn't hold back. He shouted about how Juan had a reputation in the city for sleeping with women who were already taken, and how he had crossed the line more than once. The implication was clear, and the looks people shot at Lucy were filled with a mix of pity and disgust. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, as if begging me to put an end to the scene. But I didn't move. I let her twist in the wind, just like she'd left me twisting in the aftermath of her betrayal. The crowd's whispers grew louder, and Lucy's shame was on full display. Juan, for all his smooth charm, looked completely out of his element. His confidence had evaporated, and for once, he seemed as lost as I had felt when I first learned the truth. As the night dragged on and the crowd finally began to disperse, I approached Lucy. Her face was streaked with tears, and she looked up at me with a mixture of anger and despair. "Why?" she choked out, her voice trembling. "Why did you do this?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "Because you deserved it," I said coldly. "You and Juan, and anyone else who thought I was a fool." She shook her head, her shoulders sagging with defeat. "I never wanted it to come to this." "Neither did I," I replied. "But you left me no choice." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Lucy standing there, shattered in the dim glow of the streetlights. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had finally lifted off my chest. It wasn't exactly victory, but it was close enough. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache in my chest. The events of the previous night played over and over in my mind. I had taken some satisfaction in seeing Lucy and Juan exposed for what they were, but it didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. The anger was still there, simmering just below the surface. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still unfinished business. The small-town gossip machine was in overdrive, and it didn't take long for word to spread. Everywhere I went, I could hear people talking about that scene at the bar, Some were sympathetic, some judgmental, but everyone had an opinion. I hated being at the center of it, yet at the same time, I couldn't help but think that Lucy deserved every whisper, every sideways glance. Lucy stayed out of sight for the next few days, probably hiding out at her friend Ruby's place in the city. Good. I wasn't ready to face her again. Not yet. The silence between us was a fragile truce, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it shattered. I busied myself with work and spent more time than usual with Bruce, Roy, and Claire. They had all been supportive, though I could tell that Claire still had a lot to say about Lucy. She held her tongue, probably out of respect for my emotional state. The last thing I needed was another lecture about how I should have seen this coming. When Lucy finally did show up at the house, it was without warning. I walked in one evening to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy from crying. Felt like a punch to the gut to see her there, looking so defeated. I hadn't expected to feel any sympathy for her, but there it was, creeping in despite everything she'd done. "Sam," she said quietly, "we need to talk." I sat down across from her, my arms crossed. "Go ahead. I know you hate me right now," she began, her voice trembling. "And I don't blame you, but I need you to understand why I did what I did." "You mean why you cheated on me?" "Twice." I interrupted, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. She flinched, but continued. "The first time, it was a mistake. We were dating, but we weren't serious yet. I didn't think we'd end up getting married. I was young and stupid, and I thought I could get away with it. But then I realized how much I cared about you, and I ended it. And then," depressed, "you thought you could get away with it again?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "This time was different. I didn't want to hurt you, but," her voice cracked, I didn't know how to stop. Juan was there for me in ways you couldn't be, and," I slammed my hand down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "That's a load of crap, Lucy, and you know it. You didn't want to stop because it made you feel good, because it made you feel wanted." I was seething now, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You used me, Lucy. You used me to build your perfect little life here, and then you went and threw it all away the second you got bored." Tears streamed down her face, and she made no effort to wipe them away. "I'm sorry, Sam," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I replied. "Not this time." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of all that had happened hung in the air between us like a dark cloud. Finally, I stood up, the finality of my decision settling in my chest. "I want you to leave, Lucy. We're done." She stared at me, her face crumbling with heartbreak. "Please, don't do this." "It's already done," I said, my voice steady. "Pack your things and go. You can stay with Ruby or Ember or whoever you want. But you're not staying here." With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, feeling an icy resolve in my bones. I had finally said what needed to be said. Lucy's sobs echoed behind me as I made my way to the bedroom and closed the door. The days that followed were a blur. I made arrangements for the divorce, called my family to break the news, and began the slow process of picking up the pieces of my life. Lucy, for her part, moved out quietly, taking only what she needed. I found myself staring at the empty spaces where her things used to be, the hollowness of it all sinking in. But it wasn't over. Not yet. There was still one more thing I needed to do. I knew Ruby and Ember were throwing a party in the city, the kind Lucy had always loved. It was the perfect opportunity to put the final piece of my plan into motion. With Bruce's help, I managed to get an invite, and I drove to the city that night, feeling a mix of nervous energy and grim determination. When I arrived, the party was already in full swing. The music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and the atmosphere was electric. I spotted Lucy almost immediately. She was with Juan, standing close, their heads bent in conversation. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it stop me. I made my way over to them, pushing through the crowd until I was standing right in front of Lucy. She looked up, her eyes widening in shock. "Sam, what are you doing here?" Without saying a word, I pulled out my phone and hit play on the recording. It was a recording of our last conversation in the kitchen, where she admitted to everything. The room fell silent as her voice played through the speakers, confessing her betrayal for everyone to hear. As the recording ended, I met Lucy's gaze, the look of horror on her face etched into my memory. "You wanted everyone to know, Lucy," I said, my voice steady. "Now they do." I turned on my heel and walked out, the sound of the recording still echoing in the stunned silence behind me. I didn't look back, and that was the end. I didn't get the closure I thought I would. The pain was still there, but so was a sense of finality. I couldn't go back, but at least I could move forward, leaving the wreckage behind me.